The ultimatum hung in space like a challenge to the very foundation of Kytherian superiority. Admiral Thexvar stood motionless in his command center, his crystalline features reflecting the glow of tactical displays that showed his scattered fleet. Never in 300 years of military service had he faced a situation like this. "Admiral." Zekthal's voice was barely above a whisper. "How do we respond to such a demand?" Thexvar's forearms moved with unusual hesitation. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that defied everything the Kytherians thought they knew about their technology. A fleet that could appear and disappear at will, strike without warning, and coordinate attacks from impossible angles was not an enemy to be taken lightly. Sarah Chen floated in the pilot seat of the Defiant, watching the enemy fleet's reaction through her sensors. The Kytherian ships had stopped moving, their commanders paralyzed by uncertainty. She had succeeded in creating doubt where there had once been absolute confidence. But she knew the deception could not last much longer. The human pilot activated her final set of transmitters, the ones she had saved for this crucial moment. These devices were different from the others, programmed to create the most convincing illusion yet. Across the asteroid field, massive energy signatures began to appear, each one matching the profile of a human dreadnought, powering up its main weapons. The effect on the Kytherian fleet was immediate. Ships that had been drifting in confusion suddenly began moving again, but not toward human space. They were pulling back, trying to regroup in the face of what appeared to be an overwhelming enemy force preparing for a devastating attack. "Admiral," Zekthal reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I am detecting 12 human capital ships charging their primary weapons. Energy readings are off the scale. Spes are over." Thexvar studied the displays with growing unease. The tactical situation had deteriorated beyond anything in his experience. His fleet was scattered, low on ammunition, and apparently surrounded by an enemy force of unknown size. Every principle of military doctrine demanded that he withdraw and reassess the situation, but retreat was not a word in the Kytherian vocabulary. For 3 millennia, their fleets had never withdrawn from battle. They were the masters of this galaxy, the ultimate expression of technological superiority. To flee from a human force would be an admission of weakness that would echo throughout their empire. Sarah sensed the moment of decision approaching and made her choice. She programmed her ship's transmitters to broadcast one final message, but this one was different. Instead of threats or ultimatums, she transmitted something that no Kytherian had ever heard from a human before. "Admiral Thexvar." Sarah's voice cut through the communication channels, addressing the enemy commander directly. "I know you can hear me. I know you are trying to decide whether to fight or retreat. But before you make that choice, I want you to understand something about humanity that your databases do not contain." The Kytherian admiral's 4 hands froze over his controls. Somehow, the human knew his name and rank, information that should have been impossible to obtain. More disturbing was the tone of the message. Not the desperate bluster he expected from a cornered enemy, but the calm confidence of someone who held all the advantages. "You believe humans are inferior because our technology is primitive compared to yours," Sarah continued, her voice steady and clear. "You measure strength by the power of weapons and the thickness of armor. But you have never understood what makes humans truly dangerous." Sarah paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "We do not fight because we are strong. We fight because we refuse to surrender. We do not win because we have better weapons. We win because we never stop trying to find a way, no matter how impossible the odds." The human pilot maneuvered the Defiant closer to the Kytherian command ship, staying hidden in the sensor shadow of a massive asteroid. She was now less than 10 kilometers from the most heavily armed vessel in the enemy fleet. Close enough that a single mistake would mean instant death. "Your fleet is the most powerful force ever assembled," Sarah said, her voice carrying across space to reach every Kytherian ship. "Your ships are technological marvels that my people could not duplicate in 1,000 years. Your weapons could crack planets. Your shields could withstand the fury of stars." Admiral Thexvar found himself listening despite his better judgment. There was something in the human's voice that demanded attention, a quality he had never encountered in any of the species his empire had conquered. But all of that power means nothing, Sarah continued, because you have forgotten the most important lesson of warfare. Technology does not win battles. Will does. And human will is something your computers cannot calculate, or your weapons cannot destroy. The moment had come for the final gambit. Sarah activated every transmitter simultaneously, creating the illusion of a massive human fleet, decloaking all around the scattered Catherian forces. To their sensors, it appeared as though hundreds of warships had suddenly materialized from nothing, surrounding them completely. But instead of opening fire, the Phantom fleet simply waited. Weapons powered, but not firing. The message was clear: surrender, or face annihilation. The psychological pressure was unbearable. Kytherian commanders who had never known defeat found themselves facing an enemy that defied all logic and prediction. Their perfect formations had been shattered, their superior firepower rendered useless by an opponent who fought with tactics they could not understand. Admiral Thexvar made the most difficult decision of his career. All ships, he transmitted to his scattered fleet, prepare for tactical withdrawal. We will regroup and return with additional forces. Sarah almost could not believe what she was hearing. The most powerful military force in the galaxy was retreating, not because they had been defeated in battle, but because a single human pilot had convinced them that they could not win. But the game was not over yet. Sarah knew that once the Kytherians returned to their home worlds and analyzed what had happened, they would discover the deception. When they came back, they would be prepared for human trickery. She needed to end this permanently, not just delay the inevitable. Admiral, Sarah's voice stopped the Catherian fleet in the middle of their withdrawal. There is one more thing you need to know. Thexvar hesitated, his ship already turning away from the asteroid field. What is it? Human? My name is Captain Sarah Chen, and I am alone. The words hit the Kytherian fleet like a physical blow. 1,700 warships, the pride of an ancient empire, had been outmaneuvered and forced to retreat by a single human pilot in a tiny reconnaissance vessel. Sarah continued, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and exhaustion. There is no human fleet hiding in these asteroids. There are no cloaked battleships waiting to attack. There is just me, one pilot in one small ship, armed with nothing but determination and a refusal to let my people down. The silence that followed was absolute. Every Kytherian in the fleet was trying to process the impossible truth. They had been defeated not by superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but by the sheer audacity of a single human who had refused to accept that the situation was hopeless. Admiral Thexvar felt something he had never experienced before: respect for an enemy. The human had not used advanced weapons or secret technology. She had used intelligence, creativity, and an unshakable belief that there was always a way to win. How? Was all the Admiral could manage to say. Sarah smiled, though no one could see it. Because I am human, Admiral, and humans do not surrender. The young pilot began transmitting the complete technical specifications of her deception, showing the Catherians exactly how she had created the illusion of a massive fleet using nothing but simple transmitters and creative programming. She wanted them to understand that it was not magic or advanced technology that had defeated them, but the one thing they could never replicate: human ingenuity. As the data streamed across their communication channels, the Catherians began to understand the full scope of what had happened. They had been outfought not by superior technology, but by a mind that refused to accept limitations. Sarah Chen had turned their own strengths against them, using their reliance on sensor data and logical analysis to create a victory where none should have been possible. Admiral Thexvar studied the technical details with something approaching awe. The deception was brilliant in its simplicity, elegant in its execution, and devastating in its effectiveness. No Catherian commander would have thought to attempt such a strategy, because it required a willingness to risk everything on a plan that should have been impossible to execute. Captain Chen, the Admiral transmitted, his voice carrying a respect that had been earned through combat. What do you want from us? Sarah had been waiting for that question. I want you to go home, Admiral. I want you to tell your people what happened here. I want you to explain that humans are not the primitive savages you thought we were. We are a species that will never stop fighting for our freedom, no matter how hopeless the odds. She paused, considering her next words carefully. And I want you to remember that this is what happens when you underestimate the power of human will. The Catherian fleet began its long journey home, leaving the asteroid field behind. But they carried with them something more valuable than any victory: knowledge. They had learned that true strength came not from technology or firepower, but from the refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. Sarah Chen watched the enemy ships disappear into hyperspace, their massive forms dwindling to points of light before vanishing completely. She had done the impossible, defeated an entire armada with nothing but clever tricks and unshakable determination. The Defiant drifted alone in the asteroid field, its pilot exhausted but victorious. Sarah began the long journey back to human space, carrying news that would change everything. The Catherians could be beaten, not through superior technology, but through the one thing that made humans truly unique: the absolute refusal to give up. Years later, when historians wrote about the Battle of Proxima Drift, they would struggle to explain how a single pilot had defeated the largest fleet in galactic history. The technical details were all there, carefully documented in Sarah's own reports, but the true secret of her victory could not be quantified or replicated. It lived in the human spirit itself, in the stubborn belief that there was always a way to win, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. The Caitherians had superior technology, but humans had something better. They had will. And as Admiral Thexvar would report to his superiors upon his return, human will was the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy.